it's Read Aloud with Mr. Baker, reading Lois Lowry's Number the Stars. It appears as though our reading buddy, Mr. Book Bandit, today is reading Garfield and Nermal Play Hide and Seek. I hope you're doing your home reading as well. But here, we are starting Chapter 9, Why Are You Lying? Anne-Marie went outside alone after supper. Through the open kitchen window, she could hear Mama and Ellen talking as they washed the dishes. Kirsty, she knew, was busy on the floor, playing with the old dolls she had found upstairs. The dolls that had been Mama's once, long ago. The kitten had fled when she tried to dress it, and disappeared. She wandered to the barn where Uncle Henrik was milking Blossom. He was kneeling on the straw-covered floor beside the cow, his shoulder pressed against her heavy side, his strong, tanned hands rhythmically urging her milk into the spotless bucket. And the God of Thunder sat alertly, poised nearby, watching. Blossom looked up at Anne-Marie with big brown eyes and moved her wrinkled mouth like an old woman adjusting false teeth. Anne-Marie leaned against the ancient, splintery wood of the barn wall and listened to the sharp, rattling sound of the streams of milk as they hit the sides of the bucket. Uncle Henrik glanced over at her and smiled without pausing the rhythm of his milking. He didn't say anything. Through the barn windows, the pinkish light of sunset fell on irregular shapes upon the stacked hay. Flecks of dust and straw floated there in the light. Uncle Henrik, Anne-Marie said suddenly, her voice cold, you are lying to me, you and Mama both. His strong hands continued deftly pressing milk like a pulse against the cow. The steady streams of milk still came, and he looked at her again, his deep blue eyes kind and questioning. You are angry, he said. Yes, Mama has never lied to me before, never, but I know there is no great Aunt Bertie. Never once, in all the stories I've heard, in all the old pictures I've seen, has there ever been a great Aunt Bertie. Uncle Henrik sighed. Blossom looked back at him as if to say, you almost done? And indeed, the streams of milk lessened and slowed. He tugged at the cow gently but firmly, pulling down the last of the milk, and the bucket was half full, frothy on the top. Finally, he set it aside and washed the cow's udders with a clean, damp cloth. Then he lifted the bucket to a shelf and covered it. He rubbed the cow's neck affectionately. At last he turned to Anne-Marie as he wiped his own hands with the cloth. How brave are you, little Anne-Marie? He asked suddenly. She was startled. She was dismayed. It was a question she had not been asked. When she asked it of herself, she never knew the answer. Not very, she confessed, looking at the floor. Tall Uncle Henrik knelt before her, so that his face was level with hers. Behind him, Blossom lowered her head, grasped a mouthful of hay in her mouth, and drew it in with her tongue. The kitten cocked his head, waiting, still hoping for some spilled milk. I think that is not true, Uncle Henrik said. I think you are like your mama, and your papa, and me, frightened, but determined, and if the time came to be brave, I am sure you would be very, very brave. But, he added, it is much easier to be brave if you do not know everything, and so your mama does not know everything, and neither do I. We know only what we need to know. Do you understand what I'm saying, he asked. Anne-Marie frowned. She wasn't sure. What did bravery mean? She'd been very frightened the day, not so long ago, when the soldiers had stopped her on the street and asked her questions. And she had not known everything then, and she had not known that the Germans were going to start taking away Jews. And so when the soldier asked, looking at Ellen that day, what is your friend's name? She'd been able to answer him, even though she was frightened. If she had known everything, it would not have been so easy to be brave. She began to understand a little. Yes, I think I understand. You guessed correctly. There is no great Aunt Bertie, and there never has been. Your mama lied to you, and so did I. We did so to help you to be brave, because we love you. Will you forgive us? Anne-Marie nodded. She felt much older suddenly. And I'm not going to tell you any more. Not now, not for Nanda. Just that same reason. Do you understand? Anne-Marie nodded. Suddenly there was a noise outside, and Uncle Henrik's shoulders stiffened. He rose quickly, went to the window of the barn, and stood in the shadows. Then he turned to Anne-Marie. It's the hearse. It's Great Aunt Bertie, the Great Aunt Bertie who never was, he said wryly. So, my little friend, it is time for the night of mourning to begin. Are you ready? Anne-Marie took her uncle's hand and led her from the barn. The gleaming wooden casket on supports in the center of the living room was surrounded by the fragile, papery flowers that Anne-Marie and Ellen had picked. Lighted candles stood in holders on the table and cast a soft, flickering light. The hearse had gone, and the solemn-faced men who had carried the casket indoors had gone with it. Kirsty had gone to bed reluctantly, complaining that she wanted to stay up with the others, that she was grown up enough, that she had never before seen a dead person up close, and it wasn't fair that she didn't get to see one now. Ellen was silent. "I'm so sorry your Aunt Bertie died," Anne-Marie heard her say. Mama smiled sadly. Anne-Marie had listened and said nothing. So now I too am lying, she thought, to my very best friend. I could tell Ellen that it isn't true, that there is no great Aunt Bertie. I could take her aside and whisper to her in secret. But she didn't. She understood that she was protecting Ellen the way her mother had protected her. Although she didn't understand what was happening or why that casket was here or who was in fact in it, she knew it was safer for Ellen to believe that there was a great Aunt Bertie. So she said nothing. Other people came as the night grew darker, a man and a woman both dressed in dark clothing, a woman carrying a sleeping baby, and Uncle Henrik gestured them inside. They nodded to Mama and to the girls, and they went, following Uncle Henrik, to the living room and sat down. "Friends of great Aunt Bertie," Mama said. Anne-Marie knew that Mama was lying again. She could see that Mama understood that she knew it. They looked at each other for a long time and said nothing, and in that moment they became equals. From the living room came the sound of a sleepy baby's brief wail, and Anne-Marie glanced through the door and saw the woman open her blouse and begin to feed the infant. Another man arrived. He was an old, bearded man. Quietly, he went to the living room and sat down, saying nothing to the others, who only glanced at him. The young woman lifted her baby's blanket, covering its face and her own breast. The old man bent his head forward and closed his eyes as if he was praying. Anne-Marie stood in the doorway, watching the mourners as they came into the candlelit room. Then she turned back to the kitchen and began to help Ellen and Mama as they prepared food. In Copenhagen, she remembered, when Lise had died, friends had come to their apartment every evening. All of them brought food so that Mama wouldn't need to cook. Why hadn't those people brought food? Why didn't they talk? In Copenhagen, even though the talk was sad, people often spoke silently to each other. They talked about Lise, remembering the happy times. Thinking about it, as she sliced cheese in the kitchen, Anne-Marie realized that these people had nothing to talk about. They couldn't speak of happier times of great Aunt Bertie because there was no great Aunt Bertie. Uncle Henrik came into the kitchen, glanced at his watch and then at Mama. "It's getting late," he said. "I should go to the boat." He looked worried. He blew out the candle so that there would be no light at all, and he opened the door. He stared out at the apple tree in the darkness. "Good. Here they come," he said in a low voice. "Ellen, come with me." Ellen looked questioningly toward Mama, who nodded. "Go with Henrik," she said. She watched, still holding the wedge of firm cheese in her hand, as Ellen followed Uncle Henrik into the yard. She could hear a sharp, low cry from Ellen, and then the sound of voices speaking softly. In a moment, Uncle Henrik returned. Behind him was Peter Nielsen. Tonight, Peter went first to Mama and hugged her. Then he hugged Anne-Marie and kissed her on the cheek, but he said nothing. There was no playfulness in this affection, not tonight, just a sense of urgency and worry. He went immediately to the living room, looked around, and nodded at all the silent people there. Ellen was still outside, but in a moment, the door opened and she returned, held tightly like a little girl, her bare legs dangling against her father's chest, with her mother beside them. Well, that's the end of chapter 9. Looks like the family's been reunited. You'll have to tune in next time to see who's joining our reading circle. Mr. Book Bandit will be gone, and we'll see who's joining us. All right, so answer the questions and keep on top of your own home reading. Later, guys.